Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Great American Film Off. We're here
Welcome.
every first and third Friday on audio, and then as well on video at the Dill Pickle Movie Network. It's been a little while because April was a long month, so it's been more than 2 weeks. But we're back, and what are we talking about today, Krosby?
We're talking about the Mafia. That was the
That's
Mafia.
Right.
For those of you
The
who are
Mafia.
listening, that was the very thick accent. It's arguably
Right.
Italian, but
right. Yeah, so we're talking about the Mafia. I've got, we both got the getup. You got the darker lighting. I got like the cool fedora. We're setting the mood.
It's all mood.
Right. Yeah. If you're just listening to us, go head over to video. We got a cool aesthetic going on.
We've got a real aesthetic. We didn't even talk about it, but it's fully unified.
Right.
So today we're going to be diving into some of the great organized crime films, because I think we can agree that some of the greatest films of all time have been regarding organized crime. I mean, let's be real, the one everybody always talks about, The Godfather. It's almost like the joke of an excellent movie at this point.
Right.
Is being compared.
It's like, how does it stack up to that?
Exactly.
So before we dive into like what the show is and how we actually are going about this episode, let's talk about just like what you define as like a mafia movie. Like, how do you define? Because it's such a broad thing, but it's also a very specific thing. It's not just Italian either. It can span into other types of mobs and mafias. So how do you define it?
So the way I define it when I think of like a mafia movie, and some people would narrow it to like specific mafia, but the way I think about it is generally like a big organized crime movie where the organized crime is kind of the point of the movie. You know what I mean? So a film where you have characters and you have events and you have conflicts and obstacles, all the normal things in a film, but they all of them take place within this big machinery of organized crime. Almost always Italian-esque mafia, but there's also, of course, Russian mafia in films like Eastern Promises, or just sort of generalized organized crime in a movie like Chinatown or Gangs of New York.
Right. I think it's so interesting too about how like it can span beyond the Italian. Like, you do see similar themes, and the thing is they all carry that same type of style, even if they're not necessarily about the same types of people or time periods. Like, they all have a distinct style to them. It's almost like a movie you have to like. It's not a chore to watch, but it's a commitment. Like, it's always, you've got to really commit. It's almost like an event, not necessarily in the terms of like Marvel movie where it's like let's hoot and holler event, but it's like
it demands something of you.
It demands some attention. It demands more of a like you're gonna sit down, you're gonna commit, because a lot of these movies are like 2.5, 3 hours. They're long. They got some because they are about these families, and with families comes generations, and with generations comes a lot more history and just layers and different time periods. Yeah, exactly. So here on the show, what we do is, of course, we set the topic, which, as we said, was the greatest mafia movie.
Yes.
And normally we will just break it down into 5 sections, into a little rubric. We will go point by point, all 5, and we will award a champion at the end of each rubric point. And then at the end, whoever has 3 out of 5, or sometimes 4 or 5 out of 5, will be our victor. Krosby and I are pretty close. I think I've got 5 wins. He's got 4, because last week we each got 3.
It's an even one.
Yeah, so this could even the playing field. This could put me up by 2, but either way, it's been a lot of fun debating. And we do say we don't like to fight. We don't like to debate our how each other's aren't great. We like to boost our own up. And sometimes we'll even boost each other's up, because these are all movies worth celebrating, unless we're doing a show like worst of this or worst that.
Yeah, exactly. And even the worst are often worth celebrating.
Exactly. So, of course, what is the greatest mafia movie? Krosby, why don't you take us through this rubric that we got?
Alrighty. So, for starters, we've got the Gorometer. Of course, you cannot have a mafia film without a fair amount of violence. And really, how the director chooses to address it, I think it informs your opinion of the film. So we knew that we had to set aside a little corner of our rubric for this one. For second, we've got the historically accurate or complete bullshit award, in that some of these films try to hew at least somewhat close to the way whatever place and whatever time actually functioned or operated. And some of the other films take a bit more, what shall we say, Dill? Artistic license, poetic license with the setting and the characters. But yeah, so in order to win that award, just really quickly, in order to win that award, you would be the closest to real life.
Yeah, so if you get the complete BS award, you win that award, but you don't get the point
you don't
for
get
the film
point.
off. Yeah.
You got most relatable bystander, because if you're like myself and Dylan, you don't engage in a life of crime, and you
don't know that.
and we are but humble actors, and in these movies, there is almost always an effort made by the creative team, whether it's the screenwriter or the director, to incorporate some kind of setting or character that allows the audience a window into the story. And that's why we wanted to have this award, because it's directly involved in how you watch the movie. This one's a good one. You got the Martin Scorsese Eyebrow Award for those beautiful bushy brows on Martin's face. And this is an acting award going to the most remarkable performance in the movies. We very fondly incorporate the idea that there is a fair amount of eyebrow acting, big acting in these movies, but it's almost always a challenge of how they incorporate it so well. Yeah, which is why we need to include this one.
And then, of course, the constant.
Always Netflix and Chex Mix scale. Rewatchable, enjoyable, showable to a bunch of people in different circumstances, different times.
And the movies we'll be talking about are pretty long, like we said, or at least mine is. So,
exactly.
like, I know, Netflix and Chex Mix is important, because how often can you sit down and watch a 3-hour movie? And some movies do it well, and some movies absolutely do not.
They do not.
So, what is the greatest Mafia movie? Now, there are obviously going to be honorable mentions. We'll get to them at the end, because there are so many to choose from. We did make a short list just so we made sure that we had both seen all the movies that one of us would have brought up. We all have backups in case. Crosby, I'll let you start, because my job, I couldn't narrow it down, so I want to see what you pick to then help maybe inform my pick. So why don't you take us away here?
Okay, Dill. So in typical Krosby fashion, I kind of went with a very outside the box type pick, but I'm very happy with it. And once I decided on it, I knew that I had to do it immediately when I realized it could be considered. But I decided to go with 2002 Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York.
Very nice.
Well, I think that some people wouldn't define it super narrowly as a mafia movie. I disagree, because not only is it very obviously about the Irish mafia in the city of New York, the start of it at least, it also is entirely set and organized around the organized crime. I don't want to say setting, because I just said set, but setting. It's that which informs the arcs of the characters,
definitely,
the places where they go, and the journeys that they undertake.
Yeah, and you definitely have these levels of, like, this one's in charge, and then if they are dethroned, the next person, and like who's trying to take the power. That's all we see in these mafia movies, is like this balance of power, and like whose gang or family it stays within.
Exactly.
And that's what I would definitely define it as a mafia movie. I actually was texting Crosby earlier. I was like, these are the ones still on the watch list I haven't seen, and he's like, you should probably watch that one. And I did, and I watched it for the first time, so it's fresh in my brain right now. After just watching it, it's a great pick. I mean, that is
it's a classic.
Yeah. And it's hard, because Martin Scorsese has made like 2 or 3 movies that could be on this list. I mean,
that's the thing. Yeah,
the other obvious 2 are Departed, Goodfellas, and then even The Irishman for Martin's filmography.
True.
And I think Martin has almost been labeled as this, he only does the same type of movie over and over again. Right. But again, that's like 5-6 films within like a 25 filmography. So that's only 20% of his movies.
Yeah.
But in those 20%, in those Goodfellas, Irishman, Departed, some of those are considered the best of all time. And, each one takes place in a very distinct time in both history and in his filmography. So you really do see it grow to where it's not as much necessarily this romanticizing of the mafia and the mob. And now his more modern stuff is not that. It's distancing itself more and more. So I think for some people to say Martin Scorsese is a one-trick pony, some people may think that, but I don't. I definitely think he really has a really interesting growth of the topic of mob and mafia and gangs and all that. It's really interesting.
100%. Yeah, he likes to explore different elements. But what about you, Dill? What did you bring today?
So I wanted to bring up Martin Scorsese because I didn't pick Goodfellas, Irishman, or Departed. They were all on the radar, but
on the brain.
You said it at the beginning. Every film is trying to live up to it. I picked The Godfather.
Oh yeah,
I did, and I think that you see the poster behind me. It's always hanging up sometimes,
Absolutely.
on my channel. It's just one of those films that it's not just one of the best mafia movies ever made. I'd argue it's the best, but it's one of the best movies ever made. And I think Gangs of New York could be in the conversation too. Maybe not best movies ever made, but definitely from Martin Scorsese, and maybe best movie ever made, depending on who you're talking to. So it's really interesting, again, how this can transcend not just the mafia genre, but then just film itself. And I think The Godfather does that great. And again, like I said, with family and power dynamics, it's got all that. It's all about the family and how they fall apart or grow in certain aspects. So I'm excited to fight this out because, again, yours is not strictly Italian mafia either.
No, but yours is as Italian mafia as it gets.
Right. Yeah, and I dressed up for the occasion. I was I know,
it's beautiful.
I'm going all out. I'm talking about The Godfather on a podcast. I gotta go all out and wear my fedora.
For those of you who can't see the visual right now, Dylan is wearing a dark gray, arguably a charcoal fedora on his head, and he looks just dapper and suave as they come.
I had to play the part. I could come with a bunch of red sauce and a bunch of cannolis too, but I didn't want to be too messy, especially with black. But
exactly,
keep it dark and classy. So let's just jump right into it. The gorometer, or gorometer, whatever you want to say.
So gorometer, depending on your preference. I think, and this is why I'm firmly standing with Gangs of New York on this one, I would argue this movie has some of the best film battles, period. Truly the only movie I can think of that reminds me of the battles of Gangs of New York is the Lord of the Rings franchise. Because you see this really, really intense hand-to-hand combat, and you see it choreographed in such a way that you can follow a story that occurs within the context of the battle.
Right.
And I think that's just so hard to pull off. Because how do you not get pulled away by stuff that's going on in all of this craziness? If you want to see a man with a pitchfork fight a man with a billy club, then I've got the movie for you.
Yeah. Just the sheer scale of it is just insane. The amount of people, and Scorsese does this great thing where it's some of it's close up, but he does a lot of the wide pans where you can just see almost bird's eye of everything going on, and it's just so cool to just see
the scope, and it's just gorgeous.
And then in that opening moment when spoilers, we're gonna have some
spoilers for 2002's Gangs of New York.
Right. In case you haven't come around to the I just came around to it today, so some people might not have seen it.
Yeah,
I've been missing out.
It if you haven't.
Yeah. But that moment where Liam Neeson's character is dead or dying, and there's basically that whole mob just surrounding him, and it's all a bunch of gangs, but they're all surrounding him, and he's just in the center of it, and just the mass of people. It's just such a powerful opening that really,
absolutely.
If anything, that's the best part of the movie for me, is just that peak opening scene with the battle and stuff. The rest of the film is very good, but that just reels you in so much, and it's the gore.
The beginning is the really it's a movie I adore, but at the same time, it's because of the quality of those first 15 minutes, you feel yourself starting to slip right afterwards. Where you're like, okay, now Leonardo DiCaprio is just going to figure some stuff out for a while.
Right. Yeah. It's really awesome. And Daniel Day-Lewis carrying around the cleaver, because he's the butcher, but then he also uses that as his weapon of choice. That is really, really inventive and fun. Because, you see mafia movies, even The Godfather, which we'll get to in a sec, with guns, and it's a lot of the same thing.
Yeah.
It's guns, it's choking, it's knife, but the cleaver, is that what it is? Is it a cleaver?
Yeah, he's got himself a cleaver there. Yeah,
that's just amazing. And that one scene where Leonardo DiCaprio has that bar fight, and he just comes over with the meat, smacks on his face.
Fish
It's like,
hooks him.
oh, it's just so good, and it's
Fish
just that.
hooked by a whelp.
And we'll get to the best performances later, but like that
Yes.
adds to the performance. It's just the gore
Oh,
and the commitment of the actors to the gore and being as brutal as possible, and the commitment from Scorsese to be as
100%.
brutal as possible. With The Godfather, I mean, a lot of the violence is so it's chosen very wisely when to show much and when not to show much.
True.
The one death I think of is Sonny's death when he gets shot in the toll
Mm,
booth. I mean, that is like very much like show. We're gonna show it all. But then you have the scenes
absolutely.
like the horse with the horse head in the bed where it's like he
Yeah.
wakes up and you see the horse head, and you didn't need to see him getting beheaded. You didn't need to see the animal cruelty because A, fuck animal cruelty.
Sure.
B, it's almost more effective not even
Definitely.
seeing it and just seeing the aftermath and just knowing. You know, you don't have to see it all to know what happened and exactly how gruesome it
Hmm.
was. And that's almost what's intriguing to me about the Godfather's gore is just that decision when to show and when to hide and when to reveal and when not to reveal. Because it's not as, you know, all out bloody gory as Gangs of New York, but
No,
the
few
moments
films
that
are.
right, but I mean the moments that are, they really come at a great point. And again, like yeah, it's whether we're going with like lots of blood and gore, it's like almost quantity over like
Yeah,
quality. Where I'd say the quality is about even, but
definitely.
Godfather has very selective moments of it.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel like the thing about a movie, I would say both of these movies, Gangs of New York and Godfather, when you have a story that takes place over years, you have, and not just over years, but also over like 3 hours of real film time, you
mhm,
have time for like 10 different conflicts to start and end
right.
independently.
Hmm.
And I would say that is one thing that I think Gangs of New York does brilliantly is it finds reasons for conflicts that will push along the plot without directly tying to the final conflict between Amsterdam and Bill the Butcher.
Right. Good point. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's tough because it's two totally different breeds of violence,
Oh,
but I think
they're so great. They're just so. I
right.
mean, the when he shoots him in the restaurant, he goes through the glasses. That's like that's a classic shot. You know,
Yeah,
that's
and
a
again, like when I think of gore, I don't think I think blood, and that's the thing I think the
yes,
Godfather's lacking is it's not the blood, it's the the glasses breaking, and it's like the smoke almost
it's a
like
bit more artistic in a way.
yeah, it's not as bloody and gory, but it's
Yeah,
still like it's still killing and death, but it's not like gore. So I
yeah,
definitely think Gangs of New York probably wins this point for sheer
yeah.
gore alone. But I do think it's interesting just how much the violence in this movie, in both these movies, really do add to the whole mafia aesthetic. Because that's kind of what a lot of people, a lot of people. I go to the movies for the
Think of
mafia
yeah.
movies for the drama, but a lot of people go for the violence. They go for
It's
the gore.
true.
They go for the shoot 'em ups, and I think they get a little bit more of that with Gangs of New York. So I'm gonna concede the point there. Crosby, you got it.
Oh,
1-0.
beautiful. I feel good about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just from the opening, the cleaver. I mean, I can't.
It's just a good one.
He-
Okay, interesting. Now let me hear, Dylan. Let me hear historically accurate or complete BS with your Godfather.
um, it's interesting because yours is more based in nonfiction.
Yeah,
I didn't do much research, so you'll have to tell me about
right.
yours.
Well,
But
I didn't do
mine is
much
completely
research.
based on a book. I have the book back there. It's based
Sweet.
on a book that's complete fiction. So it's hard to say
Oh,
whether something is
okay.
historically accurate or not. But the thing is, the actual figures in the book, then in the movie, are based somewhat on real people.
Unreal.
It's not confirmed, but it
Sure.
is insinuated. So I will read off. I do have an article up here just so I didn't butcher any of these names. No pun intended. Butcher. Um,
Boom.
but there it's said that Don Vito Corleone, Marlon Brando, was partly based on the real mob boss Frank Costello. Both shared the same birth year. Both profited from illegal gambling and bootlegging, and both were involved with gangsters and politicians. But then also Carlo Gambino was also a huge influence on the character. They both died at a heart attack at age 76. So you do see
Wow.
a lot of parallels. I think they were trying to make a fictional mob story, but they did bring in a lot of real life influences. So it's hard to say. I mean, it's got to be 100% historically accurate just because the history is all in the book. Like it's not really straying from the
Right.
book. But in terms of whether or not the book is historically accurate to real stuff, I mean, it's not a direct adaptation, so it's hard to judge The Godfather because, you know, but in terms of just mob and mafia in general, I think it's a very accurate depiction of what, you know, the mafia is and what the style and the types of people these are. I mean, opening with that whole wedding sequence, most movies having a whole 20, 30, 40 minutes devoted to one scene, or just of people having a wedding and people talking inside and outside and just talking. But it's so impactful because that is exactly what, you know, that culture's like. I mean, being Italian, but not being that Italian, but being pretty Italian. I mean, there's a lot of great culture, Italian culture woven into the piece that I love to see and that I relate to. You know, I always make sauce when I watch The Godfather because there's that aroma in the air. There's that idea of watching other people like, oh, put a little, you know, the little secret ingredients, putting a little sugar in the gravy and the sauce, and it's cool to see like that while the sauce is on the burner behind me while I'm watching it, you know, and that's just kind of the beauty is it's not necessarily it's not a historical adaptation of anything, but it's accurate to the experience of the mafia and the mob, and even from someone who's not in the mob, but the Italian culture itself, I think is very accurate. But Krosby, I'd love to hear if you what you know about gangs in New York, because I didn't do a lot of research on the actual historical accuracy.
So I'm you know, I'm not an expert, but Bill the Butcher is based on a real life character, a real life person, William Poole, and he was a leader of a fair number of pretty xenophobic American gangs in the Bowery of New York City, and he had many real life encounters with primarily Irish gangs. And I think the thing that's interesting about Gangs of New York, and I would argue it's actually very similar to The Godfather in this way, is that it presents to you an evocation of a very specific culture at a very specific time. And I think in doing that, it grants you this window into actually feeling what it was like.
Definitely.
But in order to do that, it does create a plot that, in my opinion, though it is brilliant, is very, I want to be kind to Martin because he's a genius, but I will say a little contrived. You know, it's a bit like, yes, and now his son is this, and he's going to go and he's going to fight. Spoilers for Gangs of New York, but he's going to go and he's going to be apprenticed to Bill the Butcher, and then they're going to do that, and he's going to like him so much that, you know, and it's a brilliant, brilliant film. It's not super historically accurate. A lot of these characters were real people. Boss Tweed, he was a real politician who ran Tammany Hall. But I would argue, I really think this one has earned a coin flip because in a lot of ways they're exactly the same. In that they present some real life type things, but neither one is historically accurate in the way it tells the facts.
Right, because you're going off of like a work of fiction that's inspired by real people. Then you're going with something that's pretty much real people. You know, it's a nonfiction piece, but a lot of fictionalized elements of the plot. So it's like, you know, not historically accurate characters loosely based on real characters, or real characters with loosely based plot. So it's really interesting. We can definitely flip the coin for this one because I think with the Mafia, and like you said, with contrived plots in general, I think a lot of these movies have to have some sort of cinematic like formula to some of their stories, that they have to bend the rules. They have to kind of twist the story and twist the facts a little bit. And just the realisticness of Mafia, you know, it exists, but again, like they really turn it up to 10 or turn it up to 11.
They play a lot of things up a bit.
Right.
You know?
All right, so let's do a coin flip. As you know, for returning listeners, if we can't decide who gets a point, we do a coin flip. Siri will do it for us. Heads is always me, tails is always you, right? Is that how it works?
Indeed.
All right, cool.
That's the way it goes.
Siri, flip a coin, please. That's your second point, Krosby.
Hey!
Boom, boom, boom. So, boom, boom. I got 0 so far. So I'm on the edge of my seat now.
You're
because
glory.
For most relatable bystander, I better have the most relatable bystander, or I'm screwed and I lose this match and I get cleavered out of here. and for a mafia battle for the Godfather to be going in so far with no points on the
That's kind
board,
of
I mean,
crazy.
yeah, I got to fight for this one, and I'm prepared to. But I'll start with you, Krosby, because I got a big counter fight to
Okay.
counter.
So hear me out on this one. I would argue that part of the reason that this film is very effective, in the same way that part of the reason a lot of Coen Brothers films are very effective, is that there really isn't a very relatable character. Sure, you can say, "Oh, I relate to the people that are sort of just trying to live their lives in this New York," or, "Well, I relate to certain factions of the gang, I suppose." But these characters are so specific and so vibrant in their own way, and that's what reminds me of a Coen film, that there are things that just cut them off from being relatable to you. You can't relate to Butcher Bill. You know what I mean? Doing that would require you to experience a bunch of stuff that no one in the 21st century could ever experience. And I think that is the thing about certain period pieces, is that I think Last of the Mohicans is a little bit like this. Another DDL. It shows you a world that is so foreign that you just have to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't really concerned with what the characters are doing because you're too concerned with how they fit in all of this craziness.
So essentially, the most relatable bystander would be Scorsese himself, I guess?
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. The most relatable bystander is that big eyebrow fella himself, Martin
Which we'll get into later. Yeah, I mean, again, like, I think a lot of the beauty of Mafia films is watching a world that is totally foreign to us.
Definitely.
And, like, I mean, we were talking before we started recording. You just saw Nomadland. I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like a life that you just don't know much about, and to just get that slice of life. Obviously, Nomadland is a lot less plot heavy than like
True.
Gangs of New York is, in terms of like building action and falling action and all that climax and all that stuff. It's just kind of like living with a character. But it's interesting to see movies that like you don't have any relatability to, and almost how that can deepen your affection toward it and deepen your fascination and curiosity. But at the same time, I think it's even more impactful to me to be able to actually like see myself as a character experiencing this and have that audience surrogate. And that's why I choose Diane Keaton, who plays Kay in The Godfather, because she is completely foreign to this whole world. She is Michael's girlfriend, and she's part of the reason why Michael doesn't even get into it in the beginning, because he wants that normal life. He wants to have the wife and the kids, and he wants to just live his normal life. He doesn't want any part of it. And then, of course, once he gets assassinated, Marlon Brando's Vito Corleone gets assassinated, Michael has to kind of step into that role, and we slowly see over the course of the film, Diane Keaton's character Kay, she feels more and more distance from him, to the point where, when he takes the call in the phone booth, he shuts the phone booth door and completely shuts her out. And that's the first time we see it. And then the very end of the film, we literally see from her perspective being shut out again with the door closing. And it's one of the most iconic final shots. It's probably my second or third favorite iconic final shot of all time, because it's just that heartbreaking end. And it sets up the sequel so well, because so much of the sequel goes into their relationship as well. So I think when you have someone who can kind of be that person to ask the questions like, what is a Don? What is a
totally
conciliary? Like, what is that? And asking those questions, to then see that fear that Michael once had of becoming, when he becomes that, and to see her reactions to it and how she just gets completely shut out. I think it's really impactful. And I think, again, like The Irishman with Anna Paquin's character, it's a lot of these female characters that a lot of people watch the film and say, wow, I wish they got more to do. But I think that's the whole point, is that they shut these women out of their lives. And it's hard to see. It's impactful because, you don't get a lot from these women characters. And I think it's purposeful to really make it clear that these guys aren't great, that they're in a life that is not meant to be, romanticized or glamorized, because
and distances,
Right. Yeah. And so in a way, having her as that audience eye makes that ending much more impactful to me, because it's not like, oh, hooray, Michael finally became the Godfather. Like, yes, it's no, poor Kay. Kay's life is gone now. Like, that life she wanted and the life he wanted. It's kind of tragic in a way. And, it doesn't end the movie on a good note. It ends on a pretty somber note. but I think it's just a powerful note. So like she would definitely be the person I'd pick as like that eye into the movie and just being able to relate. But I think, like you said, there is a beauty of being able to just watch it without having to relate to anyone, because again, these aren't relatable things. We don't see this
Yeah.
every day. At least me and you don't. I
Right,
hope.
right. No, I think, you know, I will say, I think there is a beauty to that art and that type of thing. But I will say, for this award, I think you should take it, because it is specific to bystander, and there really isn't one in Gangs of New York, because they're all fucking crazy.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Yeah, like it makes it much easier not to have to root for the protagonist the whole time,
True,
because like
true.
sometimes they give you a protagonist and it's like, I don't want to root for this person at times, and this gives you kind of an out to be like, no, this isn't right. You know, it's our main character, but we don't necessarily have to root for them.
Totally,
because what they're doing is wrong. Beautiful performance too. Diane Keaton is just great.
Wonderful performance. Wonderful.
Yeah, amazing. Truly. So now, speaking of performances, we got the Martin Scorsese Eyebrow Award. So again, like we are picking one actor, but it's like we got to talk about the ensembles first, just as a whole, just to chat about them, because both ensembles are just so. I mean,
fantastic.
Gangs of New York is packed to the brim with great performances. Godfather. I mean, you have career starring performances for Diane Keaton, for Al Pacino, and then like brilliant performances: James Caan, Robert Duvall. Talia Shire, who would go on to do Rocky, or who just, I think this was before Rocky, and then of course Marlon Brando, who is going to be my pick, but we'll talk about him later. But I mean, the whole ensemble works so well, because if you don't know every part of this family well enough, and John Cazale too, as Fredo, I forgot to mention him.
Who
unfortunately passed after doing like the best string of movies ever. He did Godfather Part 2, Dog Day Afternoon, and The Deer Hunter, I believe. It was like those 4 films, and then he passed. It was like a crazy stretch of movies. Married to Meryl Streep. Like, he had an awesome life in the short life he had. But yeah, I mean, this cast, just having every member of the family so lovable to an extent, but also so like unbelievably horrid at a point. Like, just having all these different characters within this family, even though the family itself has its own character within the piece, like having each member of the family as something completely different and unique, and some relatable, some not relatable. It's just really beautiful, and it really brings you into the world. But give me a little lowdown on Gangs of New York, because there's a lot of great ensemble performances in that.
A lot of great performances. I mean, you know, you've got just like a lot of you know, where you can tell the studio got this person. They're like, okay, now we can do Gangs of New York. You know, you've got, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio, who is sort of this main protagonist-y type character. You've got Cameron Diaz, who is, you know, she's okay. You know, she does a fine job, I suppose. And you have then a really interesting kind of collection of actors in these fantastic little sub roles. You know, you've got Brendan Gleeson playing this really, really interesting character you see in 2 different stages of his life. When he's a young fighter, when he's
taking off the fedora, because my headphones were slipping. My headphones were slipping, and this is an important combo, so I want to be able to hear you 100%. All right, keep going. Sorry.
Absolutely. John C. Reilly gives a really good performance that's very interesting and not what you expect. Also, I think that the person to round out the end of the little ensemble conversation, Liam Neeson has a really excellent 15 minutes of this movie, and then he's not in it anymore.
Yeah.
But it's a really fantastic performance, and it's a memorable one.
And again, like I said earlier, that opening scene to me is the one that really just reels you in, and it sticks with you the whole way. Because like in the back of the mind, and they do flash back to it occasionally, but like it's that scene in the back of your mind that just sticks with you. And I just love Liam Neeson in that.
No, it's brilliant. And then of course, like the crown jewel of it is Daniel Day-Lewis as Bill the Butcher. I mean, I think that, you know, I'm of the opinion that in terms of the greatest of all time in basketball, there are a handful of players where you can make that argument about them, but there isn't necessarily a GOAT. I feel similarly about acting. I don't know if there is a greatest performance of all time, but I think there are a couple where you can make the argument. And I think that Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, you can make the argument that it's the greatest film performance of all time. And I think it's funny because I think the one you're going to pick could also make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, it was between Pacino and Brando because one was kind of coming off of a big career
Sure.
already and then capping it off with one of his best roles and then won the Oscar for it. And the other was an unknown. Al Pacino was not known back then.
Crazy to think. Yeah.
But I do think Al Pacino's performance in Godfather 2 is even better. So I'm going to go with Marlon Brando as my pick because it is, I think the iconic performance of this movie. I just love, I mean, you see the picture of him back there. It's just the distinct, just the presence and the physicality and the way he just kind of, strokes himself and pets the cat. It's all so deliberate. It's almost like a Bond villain, but like more refined. And it's so awesome. Was that the one you were talking about earlier?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just career defining, and for someone who has such a great career. And same with Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, I personally think Daniel Day-Lewis has about like 2 or 3 roles in the conversation, this being one of them.
Yeah, agreed.
And actually my favorite moment of his, besides that obvious monologue where he's talking to Leonardo DiCaprio when he's in his bed, is
a great one.
When he throws a knife at Lincoln, at the picture of Lincoln, not knowing that he would method act Lincoln 10 years later and become a 3-time Oscar winner with it.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. That's really funny.
Yeah, it's just really funny because that almost was kind of the descent of his career. Because as we know, he has retired from acting. We don't know how long. Allegedly,
probably to
they all say that. But we really saw this intense method acting start with Lincoln, and then again with Phantom Thread, and now I think he makes dresses because he just fell in love with Phantom Thread so much. Just to see his devotion to the craft is amazing. And Brando is just so different because he's not necessarily the most admirable person. If you've read stuff about him, but
very complicated figure, absolutely.
That almost helps his role because you're not supposed to like love him. He's not this warm teddy bear, but he's got such a great charisma and presence.
Totally. You're drawn to him.
And another thing is this movie is one of the most quotable movies of all time, and I think he's part of that. It's the I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse, and like all those parts.
Of course, yeah. It's a part of pop culture in a way that I think few movies are, but also in a way that very, very few performances are. You know what I mean? Like there's the James Earl Jones Darth Vader, and there's Marlon Brando, as Don Corleone. Like
it's like one of those roles you can, even if you've never seen the film, the role.
Exactly.
You know the role. If someone says, "Oh, Marlon Brando, The Godfather," you're like, "Oh yeah, great performance," and you might not have even seen it. It's same with like James Earl Jones, and I'd even say Daniel Day-Lewis to a degree.
Definitely, yeah.
It's just, I mean, you talk a little bit more about Daniel Day and your favorite scenes of his.
I think with this movie, Daniel Day-Lewis just gives this performance that sort of reaffirms the like, no, he's probably like the topper. Like he just he does that thing that he does where he takes a role and he builds it from scratch. Right. And what you're left with is this person who speaks like no one else does in the movie. Yeah. And who walks like no one else does in the movie. He sits like a spider with his legs just like propped up on shit. He has this habit of like looking more at people with his bad eye than with his good eye. And it really catches you off guard because you think that he's like looking at someone, but then you're like, oh no, he's actually looking over there. He has this really, really phenomenal, and I'm sure that Daniel Day-Lewis probably like interned at a fucking butchery in Argentina or something, but like he has this super easy way with the knives. He uses them and you believe that he knows how to use them. I think between his physicality, where he just embodies this kind of tenuous, wiry, scary, dangerous kind of strength. Between that and like between his greasy hair and his teeth, he almost seems like a rat. Like he's this creature of the city, and I really think that there is almost not another performance that leaps to mind aside from probably other Daniel Day-Lewis performances, where I think of someone building a character so completely in a way that is so different from everyone else in the film.
Right. And like you said, there is still that basis of some historical,
Definitely.
origins, but I really do think with the Mafia, it's like so much is under wraps, so much is covered up with history
Mhm.
that you really do need to kind of build it yourself. And I think both these guys do such a good job with that, like kind of developing their character how they would, and not by any sort of historical, you know, necessities, like what you
Yeah,
need,
exactly.
what someone expects you to. And that's another thing with Lincoln, with him too, is like Lincoln, we have a lot of documents about Lincoln, but we don't have any record of how he spoke, aside from word of mouth and
Yeah.
like some of his mannerisms, because there was no video, there was no audio, so he had to even create that from the ground up. So even though people
Yeah.
are saying like, oh well, he at least had a lot of source material to help with Lincoln, I mean he did, but a lot of the physical and the vocal is all him. Like that's him and his character building. He I would say he's one of the goats, if not the goat. I mean,
Definitely.
he even has the awards to prove it. He has 3 Best
True.
Actor awards. Um, I think he's only second to Katharine Hepburn, who has 4. But again, she was acting
Whew.
in an era where, and she's great. She's
True.
amazing.
Yes,
I'm not
true.
taking
But
away
still,
from
a good
her,
point. Yeah.
but he's also competing, I think, in a more performance heavy and competitive, time frame. He's going up
Definitely.
against some big performances, and he didn't even win the Oscar for Gangs of New York, which is crazy.
No, when we were talking snubs, that I would say that is one of the all-time, like, gets nominated but
but
doesn't
doesn't
get it,
win
and it
snubs.
is shocking because
Hmm.
obviously Adrian Brody gives a magnificent performance in The Pianist, but like I still think pretty and like I think it is a thing that will shock people for years to come
Yeah.
that he didn't win an Oscar for that part.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that was a very competitive year,
Oh,
but yeah,
absolutely.
for Adrian Brody to win, he's great. But I think this is like something else,
Yeah,
completely something
I
else.
mean it's a brilliant performance in The Pianist. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong, amazing.
Yeah,
But when you're talking about, like one of the performances I think that is thought of as like maybe certainly I think of it as Daniel Day Lewis's premiere performance, but I think it is maybe what is thought of as his best performance.
yeah, yeah. And again, like I said, there's so many you could choose from too, and there
Exactly. It's tough.
no other would be wrong because he won for My Left Foot, he won for Lincoln, and then There Will Be Blood, which we
There
haven't
will be
even brought up,
blood.
is
Oh
brilliant
my
as well. But
god,
like this is also
so
up
good.
there. I mean,
I drink
I've
your
never seen
milkshake.
him give never seen him give a bad yes, I've never seen him give a bad performance. Marlon Brando, it's just
Oh
my
yeah, talk about Marlon a bit.
it's just hard because I feel like he's more I wouldn't even say more recognizable. It's just kind of the era. Like we haven't
Yeah,
had decades go by where we can go back and judge Daniel's performance where
right,
like we have
right.
with Marlon Brando. Like he's already passed on. He has this legacy that now we can dissect, and for this to stand out even amongst like the On the Waterfronts and his role in
Totally.
Superman and
Mhm.
Streetcar Named Desire, just all these amazing films, and this is still his pinnacle. And again, he's competing. I think something that gives Marlon Brando a little bit of an edge for me is that he's competing with a lot of amazing actors in that film and still stands out. Whereas Daniel
True.
Day Lewis, there's a lot of great performances, but I do think
Yeah. I mean, but
they're
he smokes everyone.
like this. I wouldn't consider this one of Leo's top 5 performances. I think
No,
Leo's done
no.
better. I love Leo in this, but I think he has
Yeah,
had
yeah.
more dynamic performances, and he was also early in the career. As we talked about, Cameron Diaz isn't amazing in the role.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't really enjoy Cameron Diaz. I think John C. Reilly does a really good
yeah,
job. I would
he
say that
does.
honestly, I would say he's probably my second favorite performance in the
Yeah.
movie.
So it's tough because like Daniel Day Lewis is kind of like standing out amongst like a weaker crowd,
Yeah.
strong crowd. I hate saying weaker, but like in
Well,
terms
no,
of
but
Godfather,
I get your point. I will say I think that what Daniel Day Lewis has, the fact that Cameron Diaz, Leonardo DiCaprio, even John C. Reilly to a certain extent, Brendan Gleeson to a certain extent, these are very established
right?
names.
Hmm.
Even in 2002, they were decently established names. And while I will say I don't know if there has ever been a more talented ensemble assembled than for Godfather Part 1, um, they were all, like you said, they were on the come up. They were unknown for the most part.
Right. Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, like it's hard to,
Uh,
and it's like part of me wants to go to a coin flip, but then again, like I'd feel bad not giving it to Daniel Day Lewis because he's such a goat, but also like
but
it's Marlon Brand. I mean,
it's Marlon Brando, it's Don Corleone.
it's the goat of the 20th century versus the goat of the 21st. I think.
It's
You know,
true. Yeah,
Daniel Day Lewis did have his My Left Foot in the 20th, but like it was really the 21st century where it's like Daniel Day Lewis is the
that's when he
guy.
popped off, though. That's when he,
Yeah, so it's really tough. I'm leaning Marlon, obviously, but
Of course, I mean, I've got to stick with Daniel, but
all right. So
coin
this could
flip.
give you the win right here, Crosby. If
Oh,
it's tails, you win. All right.
let's see.
Siri, flip a coin. Crosby, you have won
Ah!
another film off.
Yes!
You know, that's how the cookie crumbles. Siri
That's
is
how it
not a fan of
crumbles.
me.
That's hold even.
I think this was one of those fights where if I lost, I'm glad it was to Daniel Day-Lewis, you know.
Yeah. This was one of the ones where it could have gone either way on so many of them, you know.
So 3-1. I still have one. I'm trying to get my second here though. Let's go with
Absolutely.
Netflix and Chex Mix. I'm just gonna say Godfather for me is endlessly rewatchable. It's longer than Gangs of New York, but I do
Wow.
think it has so much to it. I just every time I watch it, it's almost like I'm transported to the point where it's long and I feel its length. But
Mm-hmm.
these movies, if they're done well, I want to keep watching for hours and hours. You know,
Definitely.
if it's a good movie, you want to sit with it for hours. And I think both films have that same argument. But The Godfather, it's like I feel like there's something new that I get from it every time. And I can't speak about Gangs of New York because I haven't rewatched it.
For
But
sure.
I
For
would love
sure.
to rewatch it. I loved it, and I'd love to go back and watch it again. But again, it's like I mean, Godfather's been like a childhood. I mean, I hate to say childhood favorite because you shouldn't show it to kids, but like
No,
it's a movie I had heard about when I
yeah.
was a kid, and I've seen bits and pieces of as a kid, and as I grown older, I've seen it in its entirety over time. I actually have a fun story. When I was a baby,
Yeah.
it was the first night ever that my parents decided to go out and leave me with a babysitter, and they didn't
Yeah.
trust having a regular babysitter. They gave me to my aunt and uncle. My Uncle Buck, we call him after the movie
Yeah.
Uncle Buck, because
Oh,
Uncle
great
Kirk,
film.
and my Aunt Rochelle, my Aunt Roro. We they were watching me, and I wouldn't stop crying. They tried every little like kids movie that was on. I guess there
Yeah.
weren't a lot of movies on because it was the late '90s, but like they tried all the VHSs. Nothing was
Sure.
working. They turn on The Godfather, and it's starting. It's the opening. It's like, do 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 do,
Of
and
course.
I stop crying. I look up at the screen, mouth open, mouth agape, and then they just sit there and they watch, and they're like, "He's watching it." And I watched it, and apparently they said I watched the whole 3-hour movie
Well, there
silent,
you go.
not a peep.
Uh,
And it's weird because like
a
does
future cinema lover,
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the birth of it. I mean, either that or literally my mom playing the Titanic soundtrack in the hospital room when I was birthed to Celine Dion. Who knows?
Can't hurt.
But like that, but that's like a memory that my parents and uncle always tell me because they're like,
Yeah.
we're responsible for that, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe you are, and I owe a lot of it to The Godfather. Maybe that is what sparked my love of cinema, and
Wow.
to know that has always been a story that they always tell. It's because the movie itself, you don't get tired talking about it because everyone's seen
Yeah.
it pretty much, and even if you haven't seen it, you've still seen enough of it to talk about it. So it's endlessly rewatchable and endlessly discussable. Like you could discuss The
Definitely.
Godfather for 3 times the length that the movie actually is, which is like 3
Yes.
hours. So that's my piece about The Godfather. But Crosby, I'd love to hear, as someone who has rewatched Gangs of New York, what your rewatchability factor is for that.
So let me tell you a story that I think explains everything that really needs to be said about the rewatchability of Gangs of New York. I dated a girl for about a year, and our very first date that we like ever did anything together, we hung out in my apartment and we watched Gangs of New York, and we watched about maybe half to 2/3 of it. Really long movie, a little over about 3 hours, a little over 3 hours. When we broke up a year later, we still had not finished Gangs of New York. I love Gangs of New York, but Gangs of New York, it's like 3 hours. It feels like it's 10 hours. It is this movie that like bit by bit rips down like all the things that you love about this world and is like, no, fuck you, it's gonna burn. And while I think that's very admirable, it makes for a movie that frankly is not super duper rewatchable. Like, honestly, like a lot of Martin Scorsese movies, you kind of need a second to be like, oh, okay, I need to catch my breath and watch some Disney Plus, like it's a brilliant piece, but I think in terms of rewatchability, Godfather is so perfect and so like the music, the visuals, the dialogue, like the food in the movie makes you want, like you're saying, makes you want to eat food. Like it's
So
one
bad.
of those films that really is an experience, and it's something to where I know that for me very specifically, I would make people watch Gangs of New York, but if you love film, you're going to make your kids watch Godfather.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you love film, you're going to make your girlfriend watch Godfather. You're going to make, if your mom or your dad hasn't seen, you're going to make them watch it. You know, you're make your friend watch it.
You're gonna make your girlfriend watch it and then say, "But I'm not Michael and you're not Kay. Don't worry."
Exactly.
You don't have to worry about that.
And
you
then
won't have the
Joe
door
takes off
shut.
his fedora.
Right. I don't know if I've ever shown a girlfriend The Godfather. I have to like look back. I mean, I probably have. You know, like it's just one of those movies where I'm like, when I watch
but
Godfather,
who hasn't seen it already? That's often
right.
the thing.
You're not ever introducing it to someone, but again, like you said with kids,
Right.
like I was introduced to it when I was a baby, and then I didn't watch it in its entirety probably till a few years ago, just because whenever it was on, I'd watch it.
Yeah.
And even if it was in the middle, I'd watch it to the end. If it was the beginning
course,
with the horse,
you've probably seen the end 1,000 times.
right? Or even like the beginning, like, oh, I gotta run out to the store. Let me put on my shoes. Oh, what's on TV? Oh, The Godfather. I'll watch 5 minutes. All right, I'm out. I come back from the store. Oh, the ending's on. I'll watch it. It's like not one of those movies that you necessarily have to sit down and watch the whole thing. You can watch bits and pieces, and I've seen the horse scene 30, 40 times in my life, just because every Thanksgiving it's like we're done eating, and I usually eat Thanksgiving at my uncle and aunt's house, that's why the story comes up. And it's always on Thanksgiving, and I I would finish eating, me, my dad, and my uncle, we'd all go into the other room, we do the unbutton the pants, we'd sit back on the couch, recline, and we'd watch The Godfather, and we'd turn it on. It's usually always the horse scene for some reason. That's pretty early on in the movie, but it's like it's so weird. I'm like, why is it always that
Why
scene?
is it always the horse scene?
Maybe it's like the way we eat, like the time we eat. It's exactly I guess we just have the same eating speed every time. But yeah, Godfather's getting that point, so it's 2-3. So I did lose this battle, but it was I'm very happy to have lost to a film by a great filmmaker who makes a lot of great mafia movies. That's the one thing Scorsese himself has, is just he makes so many good ones, and other movies too. If you've only seen the mafia movies, people, like, watch his other stuff too, like Last Temptation of Christ and Hugo and Wolf of Wall Street. There's a lot more stuff that he does that's just brilliant.
Check it out.
Yeah. Taxi Driver. I always forget that that's like not really a mafia film, even though it's got like all like the hard, like
it's got the
darkness, and
though too. It's
got like the De Niro, like the
you got Harvey Keitel with some long hair.
Yep. So yeah, what is the greatest mafia movie? The Gorometer, or Gorometer, as I've been saying. It went to Gangs of New York for those big bloody battles. The historically accurate award. Both were kind of not really historically accurate, because mine wasn't based on anything, and Krosby's wasn't really an amazing historically accurate interpretation, but Sirica flipped the coin and thought that mine was a little bit more BS, and Krosby got that point. And then the most relatable bystander went to Diane Keaton as Kay, because Krosby, as he said, didn't really have one. The Martin Scorsese Eyebrow Award. This was the hardest fought battle between Marlon Brando and Daniel Day-Lewis. Daniel Day-Lewis came away with the coin flip win, but the win nonetheless, giving Krosby the whole win. But the Netflix and Check to McScale went to The Godfather, deservedly so. So what is the greatest mafia movie? It is Gangs of New York.
Woo! For Martin.
For Martin. And I will say, Irishman was so close. Like, if you pick The Godfather, my backup was The Irishman, just because I love that movie. And that's another movie where it's like 4 hours, but it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do is if, like, you have one scene that's just like an hour long, like the wedding scene in Godfather, or like that party in The Irishman where he gets like the award and he makes a speech, like, and there's that dance, that whole big section. Like, when you have a scene like that that's already an hour, that's like a third of the movie done. But because it's one scene, it feels like it was just, it breezed by.
Yeah, just a part of it.
Whereas Gangs of New York, it's like so many little scenes that it does feel, it's like, but it's still so good. I mean, that Daniel Day-Lewis monologue with him talking to him, and he's like, it's the only, I don't know the quote, you probably know it better, but like, it's the only loss worth remembering, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And though it's a really good movie. All these themes mixing together are just fantastic. It's like, you got the son of the guy who killed him, and now of course he wants to kill him, but the guy who killed him is like kind of regrets that he killed him, because he was like the last honorable man. And like, it's a brilliant piece. But For next week, Dill.
Well, first, do you want to hear what our friends have to say about Mafia movies?
Yes, of course. We posted recently, but they wrote.
Right. The thing is, I've been forgetting the past 2 weeks. It's always an afterthought, like, oh, I need to read the poll. This week I was so on top of it that this time you forgot and I remembered, but usually I'm the one forgetting. So we didn't get many replies because I forgot to post a poll until the night of recording, but we did get 6 great responses.
Oh, let's hear them.
Marissa says, I don't know if The Departed counts, but if that does, it absolutely counts. Yes,
absolutely.
100%. My mom said Reservoir Dogs, and then she sent another one, said, is Pulp Fiction considered a mafia movie? Those 2 movies are interesting because they're not all about the mafia. There's other elements to it, but
I would allow them both more. I would more so Reservoir Dogs than Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction too.
I mean, it's the organized crime. Like they're Jules and Vern. Is it Vern? No.
Jules, yeah.
They're like, I'm thinking of Jules Verne, the author. Yeah, Jules and Vince. I'm like, it's not Jules, because Jules Verne is the author.
Jules Verne. Imagine if Quint had done that.
And I just watched Over the Hedge a few weeks ago, and that's
Verne and RJ.
the turtle. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. I mean, they're the hitmen for the mafia. It's like a mafia. It's a mob. Exactly, it's an underground. Yeah. I think it counts. Lori says Goodfellas, amazing choice. Again, Martin Scorsese love and the Tarantino love. Kelsey had 2 interesting answers. Baby Driver was her first, which I think counts because there's an element of organized crime, and
definitely,
Kevin, he who should not be named Spacey, is the the boss. True. And everyone's working for it. And if he goes back on his word, he could get killed. But she also said the mole scene from Zootopia. So, have you ever seen Zootopia?
I have seen Zootopia.
Yeah, Mr. Big.
Good pick. It's an excellent film for starters.
It's hilarious. I mean, the mole scene is just hilarious. It's like the little.
I adore
it. I actually almost thought for honorable mentions. I thought Shark Tale, because I was like, Shark Tale is also a mafia movie.
Yeah. Oh man,
starring Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese, and and then Thomas, our good friend Thomas, says, I'm a Casino faithful. So Casino is another one. Again, I think it's Martin Scorsese, pick. Right?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, so many good picks. And again, there were some honorable mentions. Krosby, you have a bunch of great honorable mentions, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, you've got Eastern Promises as a personal favorite. There's Donnie Brasco, which is a weird one, but a fun one. All the parts of The Godfather, of course, as were mentioned. You've got
one of mine was Scarface. Scarface is another good one.
Honestly,
The Untouchables.
Dog Day Afternoon was mentioned.
That's
a good one. Most Quentin Tarantino movies, if they're not about slavery or assassination,
like it's not westerns. Yeah,
exactly. There are a tremendous number of incredible movies out there. Boondock Saints. If you're more of a Boston guy.
So many good
ones.
Yeah,
as was mentioned.
The Departed, as we have to say. So now it is time to tease next week's show. And Krosby, why don't you be the one to deliver the news to everyone about what we will be covering on the next show?
So, for next week's show, we are going to be delving into a very, very special topic. We are going to be jumping into... Wait a minute. I'm so sorry, Dylan. It actually slipped my brain. Why don't you choose what we're going to be doing next week? Because I was going to say a certain actor who it is not.
I was going to say, I thought you were building like a bit. I was like, oh, we're going to...
building to one T. Hanks. And then I was like, wait a minute. No. No.
So 2 episodes from now, we will do a Tom Hanks show. But the next episode we will be doing is mockumentaries.
That's right. Comedy. Yes.
But 2 great topics. So we might as well tease both, because Tom Hanks is great too. But that'll be just on the horizon. We'll bring in June with that. Mockumentaries next 2 weeks.
Classic. And that was my fucking idea too. Yeah, mockumentaries.
It was. You usually have all the good ideas. I'm just the Hermes who has to deliver the news. I take too much credit for what you do. You do a great job for the show, and we love you, Krosby. We're very fortunate to have you.
It's a beautiful teamship. It's a beautiful partnership.
I have Casablanca's not a mafia movie. Never mind.
No,
I was going to start quoting Casablanca, but yeah. So Krosby, where can they find you on the internet, social media verse?
Well, they can find me on Instagram, Krosby J Roza, my handle. Where can they find you, Dylan?
You can find me at Dylan_Randazzo on Twitter, and I'm also on Letterboxd doing some movie reviews there, and on YouTube here at the Deal Pickle Movie Network. If you're listening on audio, please leave us a review. Leave us 5 stars. One for each hour of The Irishman. Do it. 5 stars. And then come back here and watch our YouTube video and like this. Subscribe to this. Again, we bring this show to you twice a month. So you're getting 2 hours of us every month talking about some sort of movie topic. We're talking about Mafia movies this week. 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about mockumentaries. Maybe one day there will be a Mafia mentary made.
Who knows?
I don't think we've seen
Maybe
it.
We'll make it.
Yeah, in 2 weeks it'll be an interesting discussion. Maybe I'll have to like try to think of my best mockumentary outfit, but I don't think I will. I don't know what to wear for that. But it'll be a lot of fun. So thank you, Krosby, as always, for joining me and having this amazing conversation. And again, we do not take each other's films down. We boost our own up. Series the one who takes us down. And in this case, she took me down.
Takes us down in peg.
Series of big gangs of New York fan. What can I say? All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.